The money going to parties like both of you all's, it has to be just a boon to your efforts. You all have each raised money on your own, very formidable fundraising for the Georgia Democratic Party as well as the North Carolina Democratic Party. But that little extra change from Jamie Harrison and the DNC and the Harris-Walz campaign has to be helpful.
I'll take it all, Simone, because we know that in battleground Georgia, we've got voters to reach. And the way to do that is pounding the pavement. People think there's a secret sauce to winning elections. There is zero substitute for direct voter contact. And we're out on the campaign trail. The more volunteers we have, the more money we have, the better we can get our message of freedom, unity, and opportunity out to the voters in battleground Georgia.
Chair, I'm trying to look at this from the perspective of, because as a former state party chairman, I know how hard it was, to Simone's point, to get dollars flowing in to your state and to put those dollars to use. $25 million reported last week. Alicia noted $10 million flowing out from the DCCC and the senatorial committee. You've got this great coordination. The money on the ground is important. How is that money being spent to deal with some of the roadblocks that are being placed in places like Georgia that make it more difficult for you to reach your voters, to get them registered, to get them to turn out? Because in many instances, the decks are being stacked against you.
No, absolutely. And while it shouldn't have to be this way, and we shouldn't have to out-organize our way out of some of these suppressive tactics and these laws that are being put into place or attempted to be put into place to overturn the will of the voters, we saw what happened in 2020 when Georgia only won by 11,780 votes and Donald Trump tried to steal the election and overturn the will of Georgia voters. We are prepared for this moment. We have an attorney in all 159 counties in the state of Georgia ready to do whatever is necessary. My largest line item in my budget at the Democratic Party of Georgia is my legal expenses. And while it shouldn't have to be this way, I know that I'm in the Deep South. I know what we're up against, and we're a battleground state. So when we tell people that to show up to vote, we want to assure them that their votes will be counted and certified, because now they've taken it to a whole nother level. So we are doing everything that we can between now and Election Day to make sure that we are ready for whatever legal pursuits we have to take so that the votes of Georgians are actually counted.
Anderson, speaking of being ready and making sure that votes are counted, there's some big news out of North Carolina on Friday, an appeals court blocking ballots with RFK Jr.'s name on it. The appeals court issuing a ruling that blocked the State Board of Elections from mailing absentee ballots listing RFK Jr. as a presidential candidate. What does that mean for voters in North Carolina?
Well, mail-in ballots were supposed to go out on Friday, and unfortunately, this means that a Republican Court of Appeals actually overturned a decision from a lower court that made it so that we're having a halt in ballots right now in the state, and so we're going to have to reprint ballots. Unfortunately, has been the guidance from our Republican Court of Appeals that's also allowing RFK to get off the ballot after he fought to get on the ballot and stay on the ballot in North Carolina, and is also fighting to get on it in other states. And so we're seeing a mess up in our election system, and someone that's really trying to mess with it right now, in our opinion. But we're going to make sure that our election officials in North Carolina are doing everything that they can to get ballots out to folks as soon as possible in our state.
Chair Clayton, how does this delay affect your efforts in North Carolina? And I'm very interested in this debate that has been raging among strategists within the Beltway when it comes to North Carolina and the Republican candidate for governor, who is Mark Robinson, who's the current lieutenant governor of the state. And folks are saying that in North Carolina, Mark Robinson is dragging Donald Trump down, and Democrats feel that there is a boon, frankly, to Josh Stein and Vice President Harris. But I've heard from people in North Carolina that that's not necessarily the case, and it's still a fight in the state, and it's going to be a fight for the vice president versus Donald Trump. Can you just make it plain for us here?
It's a fight everywhere in North Carolina, but I do think that Joe Biden losing our state by a 1% margin in 2020, 74,000 votes. We know those votes are out there in counties across North Carolina, and the Democratic Party here is working very hard with our coordinated campaign to make sure that we're reaching ground across all 100 counties in our state, and we're not leaving one single voter behind. But Mark Robinson is our current lieutenant governor, and he is someone that has been a Holocaust denier, an abortion denier, someone that would further take North Carolina backwards than our Republican-dominated state legislature already has this last year. But we're also seeing a very strong fight from our Democratic nominee in Josh Stein, who's our current Attorney General in North Carolina, too. And we're going to make sure we just fight for every single vote. We don't ride the polar coaster here. And so we're just trying to make sure that Democrats and voters across North Carolina fundamentally understand, to Congresswoman Williams' point, what's at stake in this election cycle, which is fundamental freedoms across North Carolina and abortion rights, especially in our state this year.
I'd like to stay in North Carolina for a little extra moment, because I've always found North Carolina to be more of the sweet spot in the South than a lot of people would say Virginia, right? Because that's where it really all began in the 90s. You saw this demographic shift and the voting shift. But North Carolina, for me, has always been an intriguing opportunity for both parties, quite frankly, to level up a solid campaign. And with all due respect to your gubernatorial candidate there on the Republican side, that brother's got some issues he's got to work out with voters. So it makes that spot even sweeter, I think. In fact, you've got Forbes noting why North Carolina has suddenly become a key swing state. Vice President Kamala Harris could become only the second Democratic presidential candidate to win North Carolina in more than 40 years, as the state has slowly shifted more to the left over the past decade, thanks in part to a growing high-tech corridor. I don't like that framing, because it's not a shift to the left versus the right. It's a shift in how voters are looking at their vote and how those votes align with their values, how those votes align with their heritage, and a whole bunch of other things.
I was going to say, because some of it is demographic. Some of it is about the number of black voters and Latino voters who are now in North Carolina.
Exactly. So Chairwoman, how do you see it? Because I think, you've now got an amazing anchor in the South between North Carolina and Georgia. Because I think that again, for me, sets up Texas 2028. You hear me dance on that one for a while.
The South's got something to say, Michael.
Okay. I think that what's important to note about North Carolina is that we are the most rural of all the battleground states. And, we are actually unlike Georgia in the sense that we don't have an Atlanta metro area that is a good chunk or majority of where our state population resides. North Carolina has huge amounts of dense rural communities in it. And out of the 20 majority-minority counties we have in the state right now, 18 of those are rural counties in eastern North Carolina. The first time Barack Obama won this state was in 2008, and Democrats still had control of our state legislature. In 2010, we lost our state legislature. Republicans gerrymandered North Carolina, and we've been under that Republican gerrymander ever since. And what we've seen since then is a decline at the federal level for us to be able to win back our national races. And so I fundamentally think that we have to chase after our state legislature hard, which is what we're doing this year in North Carolina. We're contesting 168 out of 170 state legislative seats across the state, trying to make sure that we pull out every single voter possible in districts that may have felt like their votes have been disenfranchised and haven't mattered, especially at the level where politics impacts them the most, which is our state legislative level.
The rural point is very important, and I know that dovetails with Georgia as well. In broadband, internet, that is one of the things that the Biden administration and then the Biden-Harris campaign, now the Harris-Walz campaign has absolutely leaned into. I mean, the money that has gone to states like North Carolina and Georgia to be able to lay fiber optic cables so that folks have Wi-Fi and internet in their community is literally life-changing.
Representative Williams.
Well, it's also revitalizing rural economies for the first time. And people ask, why did this need to happen? And, I grew up in rural North Carolina, and the entire time that I grew up there, I always thought that I had bad internet because I chose to live out here, right? Or like my family chose to live out here. And this administration is saying for the first time that, no, everyone deserves to have this opportunity. It is the great equalizer. It's the way to have telehealth. It's the way to have economic opportunities for people that live anywhere across the country. And that's something that our party should be very, very proud of.
Representative Williams, I want to make sure that we talk about the horrific shooting at a Georgia high school that happened this past week. 14-year-old suspect dead use of an AR-15. We have seen this before, and I think part of what makes the story so difficult is that this is an issue that has come to seem intractable, both in terms of our willingness to examine gun safety in this country and to develop communities of care for communities that experience tragedies like this. And so I wonder, as we barrel towards Election Day, how you are seeing what happened on Wednesday through the lens of what's going to happen in November.
So I've been on a reproductive freedom bus tour throughout Georgia for the past 2 days, and it's headed to North Carolina now. But at the beginning of each canvas launch and each press conference, that was at the top of voters' minds. And it is not just an impact on the community in Barrow County, in Winder, not just those teachers and those students at that school, but this impacts all parents, all people who send their children to school. When I got the news, I was on the phone with someone and I heard it in the background that there was a Georgia school shooting. And then they said Grady Hospital is where victims were being transported, which is our local hospital here in Atlanta. And my heart sank because I know that I'd just taken my 9-year-old to school that morning and I didn't know which school it was. This is the fear that parents live with every day. But yet we have Republican leaders in the United States Congress who are not willing to do something to save our children. When we saw that children were massacred in kindergarten, first grade at Sandy Hook and nothing was done, that showed me that the NRA had control over the Republican Party, and they have not gone back. What I know is that we need to elect a leader in this country who will do something to save lives. Every day, I live in the fear of if my child will come home safely. Carter does intruder drills at school, and his little 9-year-old mind is afraid that the little girl who talks too much is going to get them caught in class because the shooter or the intruder might hear them. He shouldn't have to live this way. And as a member of the United States Congress, I will continue to introduce policies like I have a SAFE Act, which will give a tax credit, not taking away anyone's gun, but requiring them to be stored in a safe. And you get a tax credit to buy the safe so that children, 14-year-olds, like the 14-year-old in Winder, Georgia, won't have access to your family's guns. That's a start. It's not the end all be all, but it's a start. We must do something in this country to save our children's lives. They're in a continuous trauma cycle dealing with this. Parents, communities, and it doesn't have to be this way. These are policy decisions.
Congresswoman Williams, as someone who put her 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds on the bus on Friday, you just hit me in the heart, mom to mom. Thank you for that. Chair Clayton, thank you so much for